Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar on impact practice for small organisations. Today we'll be talking about how you can work out where your strengths and your weaknesses lie in measuring the difference you make. So first, some brief introductions. I'm Georgie and I work for NCVO Charities Evaluation Services. As the name suggests, we support all kinds of voluntary organisations around evaluation, particularly of outcomes and impact. We're also a founding partner of the Inspiring Impact Programme, which is a collaborative programme across lots of sector support bodies to offer support around impact. I'm going to be running today's webinar in partnership with my colleague Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm also a consultant with Charities Evaluation Services, and I work up and down the country supporting a whole range of groups on a range of different issues, and I'm also a specialist in supporting smaller organisations. Thank you.
Our colleague Lauren is also in the room with us today, and she's supporting us on the technical aspects of the webinar. So here's a summary of what's going to be in the webinar today. Firstly, I'll cover what impact practice is. I'll cover some principles of how to do it well, and then I'll talk through a first kind of practical step that you can take when thinking about measuring impact. Then Sarah's going to introduce you to a free online tool that allows you to assess your own impact practice and offers lots of guidance and support around impact measurement. You'll do some parts of the tools together through interactive polls, and then you can take it away and do it yourself after the webinar if you choose to. So there'll be 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A, and you can type your questions into the questions panel on your webinar dashboard as you go. And then obviously we always like to practice what we preach, so we like to evaluate our own work, and we'd be really grateful if you could complete the short follow-up survey that appears after the webinar. So the first section of the webinar is going to be on impact practice and introducing the tool. So we use the term impact practice to refer to the activities that any voluntary organisation does to focus on its impact. When I say the word impact, most people put it together with measurement and talk about impact measurement. But measurement is actually only one part of focusing on impact. So you can't conduct impact measurement well without some planning, for example, and the measurement really loses its purpose if you don't do the assessment and the review as a result. So instead of impact measurement, I'm using the term impact practice to talk about everything in relation to focusing on the difference that you make. So here you can see a cycle of the 4 stages that are involved in impact practice. Plan includes planning the impact you want to have, and then planning how to measure whether or not you've achieved that. Often this stage is skipped and people jump straight into thinking which tools they should use for their impact measurement. Do is about delivering your work and collecting your feedback. Sorry, skipped on too quickly. You then need to make sense of the information you've collected about impact, to draw conclusions and make comparisons against plans or other information or other organisations. This is referred to as assess in the cycle. And then finally you need to review, to learn from your findings and make changes to your work, and to communicate your impact both internally and externally. It's ideal if this cycle can start at the beginning of a project, but I appreciate that that's not really realistic. Often it isn't until the work's started, or perhaps even until the work's finished, that you start to think about evaluation. So you can apply the cycle at any point within the project. And in fact, you could go through the cycle several times within a project. So planning your impact, planning how to measure it, collecting information, assessing, and making changes, then starting again and looking at your plan. So we're just going to try out the polling function on this webinar. So after hearing about what impact practice is, I just want to ask you how confident you think you are at it in general at the moment. So very confident, fairly confident, not very confident, or not at all confident. You might change this rating later once you've been through the tool, or there might be certain aspects of the cycle that you feel more confident at than others, but I'm just looking for a general picture. I should let you know that in the webinar, all of the polls are reported anonymously, so we only get general statistics that we'll report on. Okay, so quite a mix that I can see. So Most people saying they're not very confident at impact practice, which is, I guess, probably why you've joined this webinar today. Hopefully, some of the things that that we talk about and you pick up will be helpful with that. A few of you saying you feel fairly confident, and actually there are different levels of the tool that we're going to introduce you to that you can use if you feel more confident in impact practice. So hopefully, some more advanced versions might be more applicable to you. Okay, so going through this cycle of impact practice has two main benefits. The key thing is that the information that you gather and use should help you to learn, to find out what works and make changes to make more of a difference in future. That's where the review stage of the cycle that I was talking about is really crucial. It should help you to know where to focus your limited resources to make the biggest difference in future. But there's another benefit as well. It can also be useful as a demonstration to funders about your impact, or to show staff or service users what difference is being made through their involvement. It can also generate interest in your organisation and your work from similar organisations who could learn from it. At each stage of the plan, do, assess, review cycle, there are some general principles for doing it well. So these particular principles were developed by a group of around 30 organisations through the Inspiring Impact Programme. And they're written up in what's called the Code of Good Impact Practice. You can access that for free online, and we'll send you a link to it in the follow-up email after the webinar. But just to talk through, highlight briefly a few of the principles on the page. Firstly, taking a responsibility for impact is about understanding that it's everyone's duty and everyone's ultimate goal to make the biggest difference they can in their work in a voluntary organisation. Having impact at the heart of organisational plans and decisions, of supervisions and celebrations can really help to ensure that it's embedded in the culture of the organisation. I just want to pick up on the third principle, which is about involving others in your impact practice, which can help your plans and methods to be more robust and for you to understand more about how your work affects others. It can also generate more of an interest in your work and others could learn from it. Number 4, being proportionate in your impact practice is especially important for smaller organisations. Number 6 is about being honest and open about your plans and results, and that requires some culture change in the sector, particularly with funders. But good funders would much rather know that you're checking what's working and making your changes as a result. And that links into being willing to act on what you find. So you really need to commit to learning from your results. Well, that strikes out one of the main benefits of impact practice. So these principles can be applied at all stages of the plan, do, assess, review cycle, and in the Code of Good Impact Practice, it gives you ideas of how you could apply it at each stage. So now I just want to go through a practical way to get started in the planning section of impact practice. So helping you to get really clear on what you want to be, what you want to achieve, and being able to tell the story of how you think your work can contribute to that. This also meets the good practice principle too of focusing on purpose. So once you've been able to clearly articulate what it is you want to achieve, you're in a much better position to then think about how you can best measure whether or not you're achieving it. So first you start by defining your impact. Your impact is the broad, long-term change you want to bring about. Starting here helps you to keep your focus on your purpose. Here's an example from an employment project for young people leaving care. Now, I know I've been using the term impact quite loosely so far to generally talk about the difference you make, and that's how it's used in the Inspiring Impact Programme. But when you really get into measurement, there is a difference between impact, which is your broader, longer-term change that others can contribute to, and your outcomes, which are the specific changes or benefits that result from your work. So in our employment project example, outcomes might be things like improved knowledge, experience, improved skills, or confidence. These could be changes for people, for environment, or for animals, depending on your type of work. So the products and services that you deliver in order to create these changes are called your outputs. They're things like your workshops, your casework sessions, your advice, your leaflets, your brokerage, for example. These outputs are slightly easier to measure than outcomes, and sometimes people end up measuring and reporting these instead. So, for example, 50 people came to our employment skills workshop, but find it harder to make the step to talk about the outcomes, the changes and benefits that they got as a result. The things that you do to develop these products and services are called your processes. So they might be things like developing relationships, creating training content, for example. And finally, your inputs are the resources that you need to run these things, your money, your staff, your building. It's good practice, as I said, to plan these things backwards, starting from the impact, so you're led by the change that you want to create, as opposed to the work that you're already doing or have always done. But when you explain it forward, so following the direction of the arrows, this can be used to tell the story of your work, from what goes into your project or organisation, what you produce, to the changes that happen as a result. So you can monitor, which is collecting data on, or evaluate, make judgments about any of these things. So you can monitor your finances, for example, and judge whether it's more or less than last year. But we suggest that when you're focusing on showing the difference you make, you focus first on measuring your outcomes. It is possible to measure your impact, but that's often a more involved and a longer-term research project, and is sometimes beyond the resources of a small organisation. When people ask you for an impact report, for example, it's always worth clarifying exactly what they're looking for, because often the outcomes, your outcomes, and report on those is actually what they're looking for, the specific changes that you bring about as a result of your work. To give those some context, and so you're able to say this is what we produced and this is what difference it made, it's also good to focus on measuring your outputs. Funders in particular might want to have a report on what was delivered. So all of these things displayed together like this is called a logic model. It shows a logical progression from what goes into your organisation, to your work, to your outcomes, to your impact. It's a very useful starting point for the planning section of the impact practice cycle. So once you've filled out your logic model, your next step is to think about measurement and evidence. How will you best collect evidence relating to your outcomes and outputs? Now, I'm afraid there isn't time in this webinar today to talk you through the whole process around impact practice. That's usually a full day and sometimes a 2-day training course. I've just touched on what you might do in the initial planning stage. But we're going to now introduce this free online tool that you can use to guide you through the whole process and to help you to work out how you're already doing on each step of the process and where you might be able to improve. So the tool combines the plan, do, assess, review cycle with the good practice principles that I've mentioned, and also gives some general advice and some practical steps to go through when thinking about measuring your impact. So this tool that I'm talking about is called Measuring Up. It allows you to work out how you're currently doing on those 4 stages of impact practice, whether you're doing everything you could, whether you're doing, whether there are other things that you could do, and whether you're doing the same as other organisations of your size. It then has plenty of guidance on how to address each area if you want to improve. At the end of completing the tool, you can produce an impact practice report that highlights areas of strength and areas to focus on in future. Measuring Up was developed through the Inspiring Impact programme. Inspiring Impact, I'll just tell you a little bit more about it. It's a 10-year collaborative programme between NCVO, New Philanthropy Capital, Evaluation Support Scotland, Association of Charitable Foundations, and some other organisations. Its aim is to support the whole voluntary sector with impact practice. So we've developed lots of free tools that can be downloaded from the Inspiring Impact website. We'll send you the link to the website in the email at the end of the webinar. We had funding from the Cabinet Office and the Big Lottery Fund to make something to support organisations through best practice around impact. And that's why we came up with Measuring Up, and that's how we're able to offer it for free. So lots of organisations have already used Measuring Up. It's been available for a couple of years now. Just to give you an idea of how, one of these organisations that's using the tool is Sported. Sported is a membership body for sports groups and clubs. Sported completed Measuring Up themselves as an organisation with their senior management team, and then they supported 20 of their member organisations to use Measuring Up. Sported's members are small, volunteer-led organisations who report that the time and the resources for measuring impact seem either daunting or sometimes unachievable. The small groups told us that found the guidance notes on measuring up particularly useful. So these include definitions and also explain what an organisation could do under each area and give direct links to other resources around impact practice. One of the organisations even used their measuring up report to demonstrate to a prospective funder that they were really focusing on their impact practice, and apparently that went down really well. So the measuring up tool is structured into the same 4 sections of the impact practice cycle, the plan, do, assess, review. Each section took the small groups about half an hour to complete, so it took them about 2 hours in total to complete the whole tool. Overall, the groups told us that they found the measuring up tool practical and easy to use, but we did have some feedback that some parts of the tool seemed more fitting for large organisations and not proportionate for small organisations. As proportionality is one of our good practice principles, we took that quite seriously. So in consultation with a range of small groups, we've developed a specific version of the measuring up tool for small organisations. So there are now 3 versions. There's one for small organisations, for medium to large organisations, and a measuring up for funders. As a rough guide, the small organisations tool has been planned assuming that a small organisation is under 100,000 per year income, but right down to no paid staff or structured funding at all. However, it's up to people and organisations to decide which version of the tool might be more suitable for them. So those small organisations that are more advanced or more confident in impact practice might want to think about just going straight in to use the medium to large organisation version. It's totally up to you. So that's everything from me. I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to take you through how to use the tool in a bit more detail.
Hello everybody, just 1 second till I make sure I'm in the screen right. Okay, so I'm going to take over for this next section, and I'd like to talk you through how to use measuring up and then some of its guidance as well. Okay, so measuring up in practice. On the right hand side is a screenshot of what it actually looks like once it's opened up. There are 4 things we would suggest you think about before you launch into it. Firstly, who should get involved? So we suggest, of course it depends on your organisation, but you have a good representative sample, so a mixture perhaps of your volunteers, your staff, your trustees. The reason this is really important is that their different perspectives could prove really useful during the process and should help you to make sure that the whole organisation understands how and why you'll be working towards implementing and measuring up. In terms of the how and when, well, once again, it depends on you, but in the supported experience, it was taking small organisations approximately 2 hours per group. So you could do this as a standalone exercise, you could do it per section, so the plan, do, assess, review, or you may wish to tack it onto something else, perhaps a strategic away day. It really depends on you. I'd just like to highlight that there's also a downloadable version of this, so you can print it off and you don't need to be online to be using it. What it will generate is an action plan, and this is an automatic report that looks at your strengths and weaknesses. So there's a series of statements you go through, checking off where you are against each of these, and it will tell you areas for improvement, and you'll have a template. There's also a possibility to take notes in it as you go through, and these will be stored for future use. In terms of reviewing, we would suggest you take the measuring up and then you return to it in 6 months' time. This will allow you to see what's changed since then. So you can start from scratch, you can start a new one each time, or you can use a pre-existing one. Okay. So this is what it looks like when you're on. So there's when you first log into the website, it's the Inspiring Impact website, and you'll see there's an orange option, Assess Your Impact Practice with Measuring Up. So you click on this, it then takes you onto this landing page, which gives you a few more details of what measuring up actually is. The third is the register, so you only need to do it once, but it takes some details off you to do with the size of organisation you are, how many employees you have, etc., etc. You will then see this, and it gives you the different options of the toolkits that Georgie's already mentioned. There's the live self-assessments and the archive, so you can tidy them up if you like. Now you may be wondering why one is highlighted in red for me, and that's because I put in NCVO's details. So it suggests that I use this one based on my registration. However, you can feel free to have a look at the others and see what you think are most appropriate for you. For those who prefer more visual things, there's also a short video which will talk you through how measuring up works. Okay, so if you're ready, I'm going to move into the toolkit itself. So this is what it looks like. You'll see a statement, you'll see a series of not met, partially met, fully met, not applicable, with a little question mark, and the possibility to add notes. As Georgie said, it's divided into 4 sections. Planning is very important because, of course, it's all about careful, realistic planning lays a foundation for good impact practice. It really requires you to reflect on how and why you think your work's going to make a difference. It's also an excellent first step for involving others, because everyone can get involved in discussing and defining your organisation's purpose, desired outcomes, and impact. So these are the first 5 statements, and actually there's a second page. Okay, so the slide after this, we're going to take a poll, and the poll is about how confident you feel in being able to describe your outcomes. So just a little refresher, your outcomes are the changes, benefits, or learnings that happen as a result of the work you deliver. They can occur for different groups, be positive and negative, planned or unexpected. Remember that outcomes are not the same as outputs. Outputs are the services and products provided by your organisation, and outcomes is about the difference your work makes, not the work itself. So an example of this could be a youth group running sexual health workshops with local young people. So the workshop itself, that's the service they deliver, so that's the output. And the outcome is the changes that happen to the young people as a result of participating. So in this example, it could be an increased understanding of how to protect themselves from sexually transmitted diseases. If you'd like more information about outcomes when you're in the toolkit, we've designed a whole resources section with further reading relevant to each of the key ideas which are mentioned. Okay, so this is the poll. Okay, how far would you say that you've met the following statement? We can describe the positive outcomes that we want to achieve for beneficiaries. So you can choose met, partially met, not met at all. And actually, I think we have a not sure option as well in the actual poll. So as per the toolkit itself, I would encourage you to make some notes, see what this prompts in your mind as you're going through. So we can describe the positive outcomes that we want to achieve for beneficiaries. And we'll have a look at what the results are just now. Okay, we've got a mixed response. Most are partially met. Some, about a third, feel they've met this. So certainly in my experience of consultancy and training in CES, and before I worked here as well, I can empathise with you that it is actually quite challenging to describe all your project's intended outcomes. So in the guidance that's attached to this, there's quite a few different examples, and I'll just give you one. But we suggest that you could, if you're underconfident about this, that perhaps you could develop your outcomes in consultation with your beneficiaries that help you to develop an in-depth picture of the changes you make, and also, really importantly, how your beneficiaries themselves describe and experience these changes. So it'll make everything a bit more realistic and relevant. Okay, so the next section, do, is about data collection. So this is about gathering evidence for how and why your work makes a difference. We very much encourage that it's proportionate to your resources, goals, and context, recognising that most of you are small organisations. Also important in this is making sure that anything you do here is ethical and streamlined to your way of working. So before you take the poll again, the concern here is to do with ethical data collection. So your organisation will need to take steps to make sure that beneficiaries understand why you're collecting data off them, as well as how you're going to keep it safe and confidential, and how you plan to use it. So informed consent is crucial to this, that people are aware of what you're going to do with the information that they collect from you. So here's the next poll. So how far would you say you've met the following statement? And the same categories apply. met, partially met, not met at all, or not sure. So we make sure that everyone understands why we're collecting information from them and how their data will be used. So we make sure that everyone understands why we're collecting data from them and how their data will be used. Because it's a short webinar, I'd ask you to make your vote just now, and I'll have a look at this. So it's a mixed response once again. There's more met this time, but quite a lot partially met. And so thank you for your honesty. And you'll be glad to know that we offer some guidance about the Data Protection Act, data protection policies, and we signpost you to websites where you can read more as well. Assess is the third section. And this section is all about asking yourself, what do you need to get? What do you need in order to get an objective picture of the impact overall? So it's about data analysis, the process of bringing together the evidence you've collected and making sense of it in order to understand why changes happen, but not just that, for whom and why and how much change within that. Fundamental to any evaluation is thinking about the other factors that could have contributed to your impact, as well as change that might have happened independently of your work. So before you take the poll is concerned with objectivity. So objectivity is tricky in evaluation, but without it you end up with a rosy picture of what you hope to find, rather than an accurate picture of how things really are. And this can mean that things like negative or unplanned outcomes are ignored during analysis. I was at training only last week with a group of funders, and one made a comment, a quote, which really struck me. And they talked about the importance and significance of narratives of failure. So there's, of course, in any project, not everything is going to work out, and there's a lot to be learned in that. So it's just a thought to take away with you. So here's the poll. How far would you say that you've met the following statement? We look carefully at negative and unexpected outcomes, as well as the positive outcomes. Have you met, partially met, not met this at all, or not sure? We look carefully at negative and unexpected outcomes. Okay, so I'll have a look at the poll. Yeah, more would say partially met than met, which is how we anticipated it. So yes, I would like to reiterate the importance of the negative response and really having a look at what people are saying to you. Perhaps viewing this as constructive feedback. In the guidance, we encourage you to think carefully about how the way you collected data and how that might have influenced your findings. There's a lot of technical issues can happen, issues with missing data, common issue, as well as reflecting on how your own bias might have influenced the way you interpreted the information you collected. So yes, we have some further guidance on that. Review is the final section, and it looks at how you use your findings to get better at the way you plan, describe, and deliver your work, as well as the way in which you embed your learning in order to get better at measuring the difference you make. Of course, you're going to put time and effort and resources into your planning, evidencing and making sense of your impact. And you'll need to use your findings for the ultimate purpose, which is helping your organization to improve. Okay, so yes, before you take the poll was concerned with using your findings actually affect change in your organization. So as mentioned, it's the ultimate goal of focusing on your impact. So the changes you might make as a result of your evaluation, they can be straightforward, simple changes, and I see lots of examples of this, simple things such as amending your opening hours, or they might be more complex ones, such as rolling out an entirely new way of working. But without reflecting, without being a reflective practitioner, what this means is you leave the impact cycle unfinished and the biggest area of learning untouched. Okay, so how far would you say you've met the following statement? We use our findings to improve the way we deliver our work. So we use our findings to actually improve the way we deliver our work. have you met, partially met, or not met this at all? Okay. So in the interest of keeping to time, I'll ask you to cast your vote. Mainly partially met, 53% to met, 33%. So for those of you who are less confident in this, you'll be glad to know there's guidance on it once again, and we give you some advice on resetting realistic and achievable targets. We also suggest that you cost future impact practice into funding bids. In order to build your impact practice, you may need to invest in things such as IT systems, databases, training, potentially external support. And there are many funders out there who encourage applicants to include impact practice and evaluation costs in their funding applications. Okay, so this is what you get. So I've just got 2 minutes. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. This is what you get when you can imagine you've been going through measuring up, you've been filling in each of the criteria, and this is your end result. This is the first report you'll see. So the bottom one is a summary. It's aggregated data from across the different sections. And then the top is the different individual sections. So can you see which ones we've done well on in this mock-up? So yes, do and review are pretty good, but assess and plan, perhaps there's some room for improvement. You can also export this chart, by the way. And then you get your individual action plan. So it breaks it down per statement area. It gives you the score, and of course there's space for notes as you go through this. Okay, so you've finished, and what next? So based on the action plan and learning from the guidance, you can see where improvements might need to be made. We've listed several resources that you can reference to take your learning to the next level. You can also check out other resources on the Inspiring Impact Hub. And please look out for our Twitter feed and sign up to newsletters to find out about related opportunities. As before, I would strongly suggest, if you can, to return to measuring up after 6 months to see what's changed and how far you've progressed. And if you feel today you easily met all the criteria, or when you're in measuring up, it's too easy for you, perhaps now is the time to check out measuring up for medium to larger sized organizations. Even if you're a small organization, it's for those who are more advanced in their impact practice. So good luck. So next we'll move on to question and answers.
Thanks, Sarah. So we'll just come together and see if we can get into your view together. So we've already had a few questions sent through, but if you've got any more questions, if you could please type those into the questions panel on the webinar dashboard now. So firstly, we've got a question around the reporting function of the tool. So somebody's asked us, does the tool work based on one report per organisation? I.e., do you have to have a chat amongst the team and agree where you feel you're at, and then input it into the online tool? Or can you get 10 people to all respond from their perspective in the tool and then get a summary report on the average? So this person has said that they could see this could be useful to establish the kind of line of sight amongst colleagues.
Interesting point, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember the example we were given where they'd done it? They were a large charity had come together, a select few of them, but they'd broken into smaller groups and done it. And people had arrived at different answers for how well they were faring, and then they had to sort of negotiate and then enter that. It was an example of one that was used. So it did take some negotiation to arrive at what the sort of average responses were, and they did that in a live workshop.
So normally, yes, it's one report per organisation, and you would have to, as Sarah said, come to the agreement before entering the details of how you wanted to score your organisation. But what you can do is you can download and print off all of the questions, and then you could send those around to your individual team members or general staff members or trustees before you came together, and ask them to fill it out, perhaps either on paper or by email, and send that back to you.
I think it'd be a really interesting approach, actually.
Okay, so some more questions that are coming through. Are there any plans to launch a French, Spanish, or German version of Measuring Up?
I think there might be a Portuguese one already. Somebody's translated it into Portuguese.
Okay. I'm not aware of any French, Spanish, or German versions, but if you want to get in touch with us by email afterwards, because I mean, developing the measuring up for small organisations was based on requests that we had. So certainly there could be scope for developing measuring up in other languages in future. So yeah, please do contact us.
There is a precedent.
Okay, and then there was a question around a couple of questions about what happens to the data that people enter, and any sample privacy policies on the data. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, there is on the Inspiring Impact's website, there is a privacy statement you can read. And I asked about that just to confirm ahead of this webinar. And Inspiring Impact won't usually individualize data in any way. Anything you do is confidential. But they do aggregate from the registration page, which is where you say what size of charity you are, what your income is, staff members. They aggregate that data. And if you filled in a measure and you return to it, they aggregate the data across everybody, thousands of people who use it, to see what changes happen over time. But at no point are they interested in individualized data. And it's stored securely by our IT partner. Anything else you would add to that?
No. Thanks. So somebody's asking us a particular question. They're struggling to get responses to their evidence collection surveys, and do we have any tips on that? So I'll start off, and then maybe if you want to add some more. So that is a common challenge, and a lot of organisations only end up with kind of 10 to 20% response rate to their surveys. So some things that we've known have been effective in the past, obviously offering incentives. Involving people in the design, development, and kind of piloting of the survey, so that they tell you sort of what would make it more usable for them. Keeping your surveys really short, and also thinking about the best format for them, whether you might be able to grab people to fill out a paper version when you're meeting with them face-to-face, or whether they prefer the online version. So I hope that's a few quick tips for you.
Some points, something I'm going through right now with an external evaluation we're doing. And we've been training up people as kind of survey champions, so they actually go out into the community, especially if we know there's an underrepresented part of this sample that they'll target them. Maybe there's a community event or some kind of conference or so, and they'll have a stall and they'll be encouraging people to fill it in there and then. And that's something I do myself to top up numbers. I go to events or so, and I have this start lots of copies of it printed out, and encourage people to fill it in. I hope that's useful.
Okay, there's a few questions around whether we know of any specific tools or databases, IT systems that are particularly effective, particularly for smaller organisations. Now, I'd suggest having a look at the Impact Hub. So as part of Inspiring Impact, something else we were funded to do was to create an Impact Hub, which draws together its kind of one-stop shop for data collection tools, IT systems, and all things useful around impact measurement. So I wouldn't recommend any in particular, but it's worth having a look on there and seeing what you can find.
Yeah, there's a whole section there on databases. There's a whole section on tools as well.
Okay, and then somebody's asking us, they said, we collect data immediately after our work with individuals, but we don't have the resources to follow them up for months or further in the future later. Does this mean we are only collecting information on outcomes and not impact? Yeah, so it does mean that you're kind of not touching the impact side, and you're collecting information on outcomes, so the specific changes or benefits or other effects. You are actually collecting information on the short-term outcomes. So you can have short-term outcomes, you can have longer-term outcomes before you get to the kind of impact level. So even if you were following people up kind of 6 months, 12 months later, you may still be collecting information on outcomes, but you're collecting information on longer-term outcomes. So collecting straight after, you're collecting shorter-term outcomes, which in some cases may be enough for a small organisation with limited resources. Okay. So I'm just scrolling through whether there are any other questions we haven't answered.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'd be interested to know which of the large funders support impact measurement in applications. Well, I know from my previous job prior to this, there were several actually that we applied for, and we put in like between 1 and 10% as an evaluation cost. So I know that we did it for the big lottery. We had something in for comic relief. I know Lloyd's have done these things as well. So
I would hope that all of the large funders are encouraging impact measurement. And certainly if they're not encouraging it, you should be putting that forward to them. We have had a couple of funders who were interested in using measuring up and asking their grantees or their applicants, their grant applicants, to fill out measuring up initially, to kind of demonstrate how they were doing on their impact practice.
Yeah, almost like a prerequisite of funding actually, so quite interesting as a development. I don't have such a thing as a list though, but I would imagine most of the large funders would be open to some kind, especially once you're going over a certain size of grant as well, they're open to proportion of that being ring-fenced for evaluation.
And there's just a clarification come through. So one of the people asking about privacy policies wasn't actually privacy on measuring up, but they were asking about privacy policies for them to use in their own organisation to tell supporters and beneficiaries how we use and store their data. So there are some links and some guidance within measuring up around privacy policies. I haven't got anything offhand, but if you want to kind of follow up with us afterwards, I can kind of try and track one down for you.
NCVO as well has some templates on that too, I believe. So please have a look around the website.
And someone's asked us a specific question about whether they can print their action plan from measuring up.
Yes, you can. You can export it to an Excel document and then do as you wish from there. Oh, that's interesting. Any tips for measuring outcomes of helplines where follow-up opportunities is limited? One of our colleagues is just about to publish a paper on that, actually. Milla.
Okay. Oh, perhaps we could.
So, Julie, if you watch this space, there'll be. I'm not sure how we can connect with you after this, but we'll have a look and we'll make sure you get a copy of that.
Okay.
But we talk about sort of doing it once every 3 months or once every 6 months, where you have a day dedicated to collecting the data. So it's like a sample, and it's in the calendar, and people still randomly call up, and you just that day ask them all your evaluation questions. So it's less onerous on your staff, and it's on the people calling in. So there's one example.
Thanks. And then we've got one more question about how do you manage the challenge of engaging beneficiaries in giving feedback in a live context, given the balance of the relationship? And that is a really important question. There are some particular sort of key working or case working outcomes tools out there. For example, I'm not promoting any in particular, but for example, the Outcomes Star, which help to gather outcomes information within a kind of face-to-face contact that you're having anyway with the beneficiary. So it's worth having a look at some of those. Okay. I think that's all of the questions then that we've answered. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for joining the webinar today. We'll send a follow-up email, as we've said, with some links and some contact details. And I wish you luck with using measuring up in the future. And yeah, the final slide. Oh, sorry, I got carried away there. So yeah, and if you could complete the short feedback survey that appears when you exit the webinar, then we'd really appreciate that, because we do like to evaluate our evaluation work. So yeah, thank you very much, and good luck with measuring up.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Cheers.